So I really like grind by weight grinders. I think they're one of the best things to happen for home baristas. They're not perfect, and they're definitely not for everybody, and that goes for this one too. But what makes grinders like this so great is actually pretty cool. You see, on-demand grinders, that's grinders that have this hopper up here. For the longest time, you could automate a lot of them, but only by time. What that basically means is you set your grind setting on here, get it so that it's pulling espresso properly, but then you need to go into more settings and tell it how long to run for in seconds in order to get the right amount of coffee to come out. It works, but the thing about it is anytime you change your grind setting or change your bean, that's going to change your grinding rate, how fast the beans come out. So 18 grams of coffee coming out over say like 16 seconds on one bag of coffee is not necessarily going to be the same if you get a different bag of coffee. And that can be kind of annoying. You know, anytime you finish a bag of coffee, you throw a new bag in there, you have to go through this grind size, then set your grind time, this multi-step process, blowing through shots before you can even have your coffee dialed in the way that you like. Grinders like this one eliminate the whole second half of that equation by putting a little scale right inside here that weighs your output as it's coming out. So whatever your grind size is at, it's going to spit out the right amount of coffee without all that trial and error. It really speeds up the dial-in process and gives you a shorter road to great coffee. So I really like this type of grinder. Now this grinder in particular, which was sent to me by Eureka, is called the Libra 65 AP, which stands for all purpose. And it's actually got a couple things going on besides the scale that I'm a pretty big fan of. Also a couple things that I do not love a whole lot. And today we're going to try and answer the question, is this a grinder that you should consider? It comes in at just over $800 US, and manufacturing sustainability wise, the grinder body itself is all manufactured in Italy, and the burrs, the cutting surfaces themselves, are actually made in partnership with a towel mill, which is also manufactured in Italy. So the whole package is going to be manufactured in alignment with labor laws in the EU. Now, on the whole, Eureka's been around for a long time. Generally, their grinders are very well loved by the people who use them, so I was looking forward to testing this. But before we get into the nitty-gritty and the good, the bad, and whether or not you should consider this grinder, let's just have a quick overview of how this works. The beans go in here at the top. There's a little gate that you can use to shut the hopper off if you need to remove it for whatever reason. The grind size is set with this large dial adjustment here. This is actually an upgrade over previous Eureka grinders where the dial was much smaller. This is actually pretty nice. It's also got a revolution counter up here on the mounting bracket, so you can kind of see how many times you've gone around here on the grinder. There is a master on-off switch right here on the side, and when the grinder is on, everything displays on this nice little display right here. And it's pretty simple the way it's laid out. You have single and double settings that you can toggle between, and if you want to increase or decrease the weight, you just use the plus or minus settings. So when you're ready to grind, you just grab your portafilter. Comes with this little dosing ring also. You put the portafilter in here, and then you press the appropriate button for whichever dose you'd like to spit out, and it'll grind it up for you. Awesome. And it stopped automatically there because it is set to stop at 18 grams by weight. So, you know, if you need to make a minor adjustment next time, you don't need to make any changes to a time-based setting. Now, if you want to do filter coffee, the grinder also comes with this nice little dosing bin and a grind cover chute. And if you want to make any adjustments to the positioning of the fork, it's just got that hand tight knob, very handy to move the portafilter fork adjustment up and down. So I think we should pull an espresso here and see how this thing tastes. All right, let's give this a drink. And this is where I had my first really big surprise with this grinder, which we are going to come back to, but the taste is really nice. Good, clear definition, nice presentation of the acidity, very impressive shots. So good. And likewise, on filter coffee, I also got very good results. Fast drawdowns, good definition of flavor, really actually better performance than I expected, to be totally transparent, on filter. So we're going to come back to the taste, but a couple things that you should consider overall if you're thinking about a grinder like this. First is, does this grinder as a package overall fit how I want to brew coffee? on a regular basis. Second is that taste profile, and we are going to talk about that. Next is performance, and then last, let's say, aesthetic match. And that one for me is the easiest to talk about because it's kind of like you like it or you don't. And I actually quite like the way that the Eurekas look, but when I bring a new piece of coffee equipment into the house, it has to pass the wife test. So I put it on the counter, I ask my lovely wife Sarah if she likes how it looks, and if she says yes, and I agree, then we have a winner. And in the case of the Eureka grinders, we both like how they look. Very cool, crisp, clean, Italian, comes in a lot of different colors. Nice look. I do kind of miss the square hopper though. It's a round hopper on the 65 burr size. Let's back up and talk about that taste a little. And this is where the grinder really went from like, okay, this is a solid grinder to, wow, okay, this grinder is a little bit more than I expected. And some of this is going to be subjective. The Libra 65 AP uses what's called all-purpose burrs. And the upper burr in particular is what's called a blind burr, meaning it has no screw holes. Only on-demand grinder I can think of that ships with a blind burr. Still though, most of the time I'm actually pretty skeptical when a grinder ships with all-purpose burrs. I find in many cases, a burr set that is saying it's going to be really great for filter, it's going to be really great for espresso, it ends up kind of not doing any of those things very well and just being somewhat mediocre. These burrs I was really impressed with. Now, when you actually look at the geometry of them, there's no like really big teeth that are called pre-breakers on this. It's all kind of these smaller teeth that just go all the way around the edge. And that slows down the feed rate, the rate at which the beans will kind of pass through the grinder. And without getting too technical, the net result of that is a more uniform grind particle size. Basically means all the grounds are really close to the same size. Very often espresso grinders will produce a lot of these little tiny dusty particles called fines. With this type of burr, you see fewer fines. Now that's going to do a couple things. Number one, it's going to make it a lot better for filter coffee. So you're going to have much improved results on filter compared to trying to use an espresso burr for filter. On espresso, it's going to provide more clarity and separation of flavor, which I really like. It's also going to slightly reduce the body, which I actually also like that. And it's going to give a lot of nuance to actually let the different elements of the flavor come through for you. Now, the trade-off of having a particle size distribution like that is that it can be a little bit harder to dial in for espresso. And I definitely did find that compared to like a really blendy, big traditional espresso burr, the sweet spot was more narrow, a little bit trickier to dial in, especially if you are new to this whole thing. Now, once you get it dialed in, I did find it very consistent. And I did find that it got a little bit easier to dial in after I had a couple of kilos of coffee through the burrs. So they did kind of settle into a little bit more of a rhythm as time went on. Overall, I really like the taste. And if you're into burrs, you might say that, hey, that kind of looks like an SSP 64 MP. And you would be right. There are a lot of similarities to the geometry. Now, I have seen that before with other burrs, and they don't quite line up in terms of taste. This one is actually a lot closer to an MP than I thought it was going to be, and I really enjoy the presentation in the cup. Again, not for everybody. If you're looking for those big, thick, super syrupy bodies, may suggest something else, but I quite enjoy this taste profile. Now, the next thing that you might want to consider, performance. And I think the main performance consideration for this specific model is actually the accuracy of this scale in here. And on the whole, I did find it quite accurate. You know, typically plus or minus 0.1 as long as I was using the same coffee. That being said, I found it did take a couple shots to get to that predictable state of accuracy. So if you're looking at this and you're thinking, hey, I'm going to flip around, do all kinds of different grind settings, switch out the beans every now and then, you're going to be 2 to 3 shots before you're seeing that scale being really accurate. Retention, the amount of grinds that are kind of retained in there and could have a risk of making it into your next ground dose. Normally with this type of grinder, I would expect that to be very high, and I was pleasantly surprised. As far as the amount of grams that could potentially be exchanged, I was finding it was like in the range of 1.5, maybe 2 grams. There was another gram or so of retention that could hang out if I really went digging for it. That is less than a lot of grinders that are similar, and that's partially because of that upper blind burr without those screw holes, but also all the little quirks that Eureka has here of how they've designed their chute and the clearances and tolerances in there. It's all working to provide a very low amount of retention. Now, that small amount of retention, if your grinder has been sitting for like a day, you still probably don't want that in your espresso shot. Or if you're going from filter to espresso, you probably don't want it in there either. So what I did was I set my single setting to more or less a purge. I just turned it down as far as it would go. 3 grams was as low as I could get it. And anytime if the grinder has been sitting for a while or I change a grind setting, I go in and I just purge that for 3 seconds, let it run, dump that coffee out, and then I flip it back into double and do my main dose. Overall, surprisingly pleased with the retention. Couple other performance snapshots. The grinder runs at 1350 RPM. As far as grind time, I found it ground about 1 gram, give or take, per second, depending on the bean I was using for espresso. On filter, it was a little bit faster, somewhere up, 2 or just north grams per second. On the slow side, for sure, I would say, and part of that is because of the design of the lower feed rate of those burrs. Worth the trade-off for the result in the cup as far as I'm concerned. As far as volume, it is a little bit louder. So I found it was, just in and about or just over 80 dB or so. Combined with the slightly longer grind time, that might be a consideration for you. Alignment out of the box was certainly good enough, and I was getting very consistent grind time, so that's fantastic. And fidelity, which is the amount that your espresso shot will change kind of in between each tick, I found it was between 3 to 5 seconds difference. A little bit of a narrow sweet spot there, but with the design of this dial, you can dial it in reasonably enough for sure. Also, because it's stepless, you can kind of set it between settings. I found I got the best results when I always approached the grind from the same size. The way I do that is I go coarser and then I always adjust finer to my finer setting. If you're going finer by a lot, best practice is to do that while the grinder is running. Now, static can very often be an issue, especially with on-demand grinders that don't use RDT. That'll often change depending on your relative humidity. For me, it's pretty humid right now where I am. I didn't find that to be a big deal. I didn't even really need the dosing funnel to reduce static. What I did find was if I didn't use the dosing funnel, the grounds could sort of pile up in the front part of the portafilter, sometimes spilling. So most of the time I use the dosing funnel for that reason. Now, performance and taste aside, we come back to the original question, and that is, does this grinder, even if it checks both of those boxes, does it even really fit the way that you want to make coffee? Now, it can do both espresso and filter very well, which is rare. I don't very often find grinders that I'm happy with how they both brew espresso and filter. What I will say is if you want to bounce back and forth on a regular basis, filter, espresso, espresso, filter, espresso, filter, filter, espresso, maybe you do a morning espresso and you want to do an afternoon filter and you're like, I could see myself doing that most days. I would actually probably push you in a direction of a single dosing grinder. And there are a couple reasons for that. Number one, on this grinder, it's gonna take you a couple doses for the scale to really operate with 100% accuracy after you make a big grind change or a coffee change. Also, just making that big of a change on this dial is a little tedious. I was finding it was, over a revolution for sure, very often closer to 2 revolutions, depending on the coffee, between my espresso setting and my filter setting. And then when you come back to your espresso setting, often the sweet spot is not in the exact same place, and you have to make a bunch of really fiddly adjustments. On top of that, you can't really switch coffees very easily. It's really designed to kind of go through a whole bag and then you put on another bag. So if you want to do any of that stuff, switching stuff up on a regular basis, would highly suggest single dosing, where you weigh out 1 serving of coffee at a time and grind it as you need it. For a grinder like this, I think it can be a good fit for either filter or espresso, but you'll want to probably leave it in that configuration most of the time. Now, that being said, both espresso performance and filter performance are quite nice, and combined with the grind by weight tech, the burr spec, and the price, this grinder is offering pretty impressive value at its price point. Now, a couple other considerations or little things that did annoy me a little bit. Now, if you leave your portafilter in here for a second, I don't know exactly how long it is, maybe like 10 seconds or something, and you're getting ready to make your coffee, you're having a conversation with your spouse, you're maybe waiting for your espresso machine to heat up before you grind your coffee for a few minutes, and you just sit here and you park the portafilter in there, go and do whatever, and come back to it, and then you go to grind your coffee. It will give you this FH warning, and you're like, what is that? Then you take your portafilter out and you put it back in, and it gives you the same warning. Then you turn the grinder off and you turn it on and it gives the same warning. And you're like, what is going on with this? It is some issue with the grinder kind of resetting the scale calibration after a certain amount of time and thinking that the portafilter actually isn't in there. So what you need to do is you need to take it out, leave it out for like 3 to 5 seconds, something like that. And when you put it back in, it will be ready to go. Caught me off guard the first couple times, so there you go. Also, cleaning out the inside of the grinder is a lot more difficult than I would like. A lot of grinders these days have tool-less disassembly. You can just do it all with your hands. You need to get screwdrivers apart and pull the badge off the back and take out a hidden screw, and before you can even get the top off. Then you get into the burr chamber and there's more screws to get the burr out. And then you're in there cleaning, and just with the way the grinder is designed, you're kind of paranoid about knocking grounds kind of inside the grinder body, which it's probably fine, but doesn't seem very good. Just a little more tedious than I would like. I would suggest to clean your grinder on a somewhat regular basis, every few months at the least, and the darker your coffee is, the more often I would recommend doing it. Once you do it a couple times, it's not a big deal, but also I wouldn't exactly call it pleasant. Now, I do really like how easily you can adjust the portafilter forks up or down without any tools. That's really slick. I did find that bottomless portafilters were a little loose in here. They can kind of get off center or didn't always fit in there the right way. And this screen up here, it's nice, it's simple, it's not confusing, but it is a little sensitive. So when I first got it, I pressed it a couple times and it kind of left this like ghost imprint there. Just made me a little nervous at first that I was gonna maybe accidentally damage the screen. Calibrating or zeroing the grinder though, that's pretty nice. You just remove this set screw and you can adjust your grinder to touch and then set it to 0. Very intuitive, very seamless, very nice feature. I like that. And as I mentioned, the taste profile, I really like it. It's fantastic. Very competitive feature set, great all around burr, and competitive price. So I think if it's within your budget, you are not necessarily going to be flipping between espresso and filter on a regular basis. This is definitely a very nice grinder. So if you made it this far, I'd actually love for you to subscribe to my channel. I love reviewing stuff like this, and it's probably the best thing that you can do to support me. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on the Libra 65 AP. Or even if you don't own one, but you own another Eureka grinder, I would love to hear your experience. I do have several other Eureka grinders that I can make videos on, so let me know what you want to see in the future. I hope your next cup of coffee is fantastic, and we'll see you next time.